Hi, B. Winfield here from merribeefarmacy in Nannup, Western Australia. I just attended and purchased a conference called Healing from GMOs and Roundup. The host, Jeffrey Smith, is always wonderful, and his 20 presenters were so excellent and leading edge. I wanted to share the latest from these best doctors and scientists in the world in a form you can listen to while working. Because the time for purchasing the series has elapsed, and these ideas need to be shared widely. Please do that. Larry Boland was a really great speaker. Larry is a rocket scientist, a NASA engineer working on the Hubble Space Telescope way back in the day at the Earth Science Center. Larry was partly responsible for the first and for a long time the only photograph of Earth from space. Larry was seeing the first images of human-caused damage to the biosphere, such as the hole in the ozone layer. This sparked Larry to ask what could be done to stop the global effects of agribusiness. 60 to 100% of rain samples contained Roundup. This means to save and use water in tanks near farming areas is hazardous, and no doubt the situation is similar here in Australia. It's not therefore surprising to find that most people in the world have Roundup in their body. The company is currently measuring the amount of glyphosate in people and their pets, on farms, in livestock and in farmers, and is conducting testing for councils and for academic researchers on nature and human health. He left NASA and co-founded the non-profit Health Research Institute, or HRI, and associated laboratories. The Health Research Institute have established that Roundup is everywhere in the United States, the first country to grow GM Roundup-ready crops. It's been measured that in Europe most people have Roundup in their urine as well. So it's in the soil, in the air, in ground and surface water, in the food and in rain. In a sample of 1,000 health-conscious tending individual urine donors, 86% of the people had detectable glyphosate and its main metabolite or waste product, AMPA for short. Researchers say AMPA is more potent than the original glyphosate molecule. The average level in the 1,000 people tested was half a part per billion. The range went from not detected to the highest result of 33 parts per billion. The chap who took the prize for the highest level was a heavy consumer of mung beans. Poor guy, trying to do the right thing. But he, like many people, didn't know that legumes can be extremely high in Roundup because they're grown in vast quantities in Canada, and this Roundup treatment just before harvest is applied as a desiccant, and we'll talk about that more later. So the man came back to Larry for another test after removing mung beans from his diet for a month, and his glyphosate levels had dropped by 95%. There's the Earth from space, which we should have had earlier. I have put slides that if you have got time to look at and read the captions. They're pictures from our farm, some quite old and some much newer. We have been very much affected by climate change, and we found out everything is to do with soil microbes, and these are in our gut as well. And every disease does come from something wrong in the gut, as Hippocrates said so many years ago. And diseases of plants come from something wrong in the soil microbiome. Now back to the testing results and all. The organic diet, only 14% of the 1,000 US individuals tested in this citizen science experiment did not have glyphosate in their urine, and these people identified as being committed to eating organic food exclusively. The lowest level of organic eaters had the highest level of glyphosate and its highly toxic breakdown product. AMPA, so a direct correlation was found between industrial food consumed and levels of glyphosate in someone. We'll get into the significant health ramifications later in this series, but I do touch on them further along. High alert foods. The foods that had the biggest effect on people, well, the food that had the biggest effect on people was oats. Oats had 1,254 parts per billion of glyphosate. Like the pulses, which for us in Australia come mainly from Canada, and they've also been irradiated before entering our country. Cereals such as oats, barley, wheat and rye crops are dried down or desiccated with Roundup, so they don't mould and are easier to harvest. So we find high levels in cereal crops, sugar, wheat, potatoes, as well as, of course, the Roundup ready crops, which are canola, soy, cotton, and corn. So apart from cereals, they're using this Roundup desiccation procedure just before harvest on kiwi fruit, sweet potatoes, Irish potatoes, and sugar as mentioned. So wheat and blackstrap molasses are on the list of high alert foods. This is really tragic because these are health foods. Oats was and still is, if grown organically, a really great food. It's a carminative, which also gives energy to people and animals, especially horses. Similarly, pulses and wheat are also superfoods. Bread was called the staff of life because it was made of the whole grain wheat, made digestible by a fermentation process, as in sourdough, which pre-digested the anti-nutrient phytates on the whole wheat, but released the huge list of 21 vitamins and minerals found in wheat. Wheat germ is comparable to liver for the array of minerals and B vitamins it contains. Whole foods can no longer be trusted as health-building, healing foods, unless, of course, organically grown. If you doubt that this Roundup desiccation process is going on in Australia, my friend Dale Lloyd of Dumbleyung, Eden Valley Biodynamic Grains in Dumbleyung, assures me that his neighbours are using it out there in the wheat belt. Dale emailed me a copy of the permit, and I'll try to put that permit up somewhere. Anyone, anywhere, anytime can obtain this permit. You and I could go out and legally spray poison on food crops just before harvest with this wonderful permit. Honey was also high on the list of foods to be careful of. Another superfood that, if produced near farmlands, is now possibly health damaging. Bees love canola flowers, and the bees end up having learning disabilities from ingesting Roundup Ready TM canola flower nectar, I suppose. But anyway, for some reason, when they frequent GM crops, they cannot navigate back to the hive. The bees also need lactobacillus, as we all do, in their gut, but glyphosate knocks out these most essential beneficial bacteria, the lactobacilli, first, leaving the normally small populations of pathogenic or opportunistic gut bacteria alone to proliferate in the absence of those beneficials that usually keep them in check. Therefore, bees can be surrounded by food but starving to death as they can no longer digest food. Think of the rise in Crohn's disease in our sort of 30-year-old population in Australia, that there's a large spike in the rates of that disease here in Australia, and you have to wonder, is all these food intolerances, food allergies, and things like Crohn's disease, digestive problems due to Roundup? In Canada, a leading cultivator of GM crops, sales of honey have plummeted by 50% amid concern that integrity of the product has been compromised. And some little phrases out of articles, news articles, London AFP. A 3-year study by Professor Hans Heinrich Kartz at the University of Jena found that the gene used to modify oilseed rape, as they call it in Europe, or as we call canola, had transferred to bacteria living inside honeybees. The findings undermine claims by the biotech industry and supporters of GM foods that genes cannot spread. The honeybee population in the US has collapsed, putting in jeopardy $14 billion worth of horticultural and pastoral crops, such as lucerne and rye. The flowers of apples, soft fruits, kiwi fruits, almonds, and many more won't set fruit without bees as pollinators. If there is no pollinator, there is no fruit. Pollination and fruiting, however, is lowest near GM crops, while in organic fields, where GM is banned, pollination goes on unaffected. Australian bee breeders have enjoyed selling pollination bees to American almond orchardists for good money in recent years. Sadly, our bees die 2 weeks after arrival, shortly after achieving that pollination. Due to the toxic environment created by American orchardists, there is an ongoing business for Australian beekeepers for now. But if we continue to follow America's lead in farming practices, for how long will we have bees? Organic honey in Larry's tests of some 50 plus foods turned out to have 95% less glyphosate than honey from near GM crops. So be careful of your honey. For me, the honey from our native forests is the best. It's been proven to be equal to Manuka honey in its medical applications. Right now, we have to stop the damage to this honey industry being caused by none other than our own WA government, who on one hand are promoting our native honeys while thwarting the industry on the other hand by continuing clear felling of karri forests and harvesting of jarrah at an accelerated rate. They're also hell-bent on continuing a controlled burning program started by Terry Redman, our MP, and leader of the government not long ago. These controlled burns or prescribed burnings are, in this day and age of climate change, way out of control and burning very hotly the entire individual tree right up. Every leaf is brown and scorched. I've never witnessed this before after 40 years of living in the southwest forest region, and I'll be waiting to see if these massive trees so thoroughly scorched this year will regenerate. From studies of fatty liver disease, where rats were fed a diet 0.1 of a part per billion glyphosate, we know that the majority of people in Larry's studies had levels that exceeded the amount in the rats in whom non-alcoholic fatty liver disease emerged. And that is also on the rise. Endocrine disruption. Does the dose maketh the poison? Endocrine disruptors such as glyphosate are actually just as dangerous at extremely low levels, as in parts per quadrillion, as they are in large doses. This is because the body doesn't recognise these very tiny amounts as foreign, as anything but its own hormones, and doesn't mount a defence response. In certain toxins, the higher the dose, the higher the toxic effect. But in tiny doses, some toxins have a bigger effect than in a large dose. Beware the U-shaped curve of the endocrine disruption effect. And so much for Monsanto's false claims that Roundup is biodegradable. According to Larry's tests, it's found 22 years later in some soils. For maintaining this falsehood that Roundup was biodegradable for 30 years and defending their right to claim biodegradability on the label in court, in Europe, in France in fact, Monsanto was fined a mere €28,000 after going through 3 courts in France and appealing each time. See the opening scenes of the documentary The World According to Monsanto for further information. Pets. 15 dogs and 1 cat's wee were tested and found to have very high levels. 50 times the average of human beings was found in dogs. Why would that be? Well, dogs drink from puddles and they roll and play in the grass and run around with bare feet. Dermal exposure and penetration through the pores is suspected. Poisoning through skin absorption was way higher than expected by Monsanto scientists who studied skin exposure of Roundup. Don't let your kids run around barefoot in the park till we get councils to stop spraying this terrible poison everywhere. There was a study of farmers, ones that wore gloves had 10 times less glyphosate within them than those who did not. Dogs are also eating kibble or dry chow food high in roundup residues. Horse feeds are also chock full of GMOs. Could there be American sugar beet pulp, which is GM, legumes, corn, soy, cottonseed oil, and Western Australian canola meal in your pet's food? Definitely we know the vast majority of pigs, chooks and cows in WA are eating GM canola meal, the residue left after the oil is expressed. Mount Barker so-called free-range chickens are no exception. Leg injuries in horses were correlated with those eating GM crops or foods, and those, those that people invest millions in a racehorse, and they better be careful of soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, and alfalfa, American alfalfa ingredients in their horses' feed. There was a dog food out called Science Life. I don't know if it's still for sale. It was being promoted heavily, very expensive, promoted by vets trained at Monsanto-funded universities as the best dog food, but it was harming dogs. Fertility. Glyphosate binds manganese to its molecule, and other minerals too, but manganese in particular, and creates manganese-deficient food. This creates manganese-deficient food. Manganese deficiency is linked to poor reproductive health. Non-GMO feed for both livestock and humans leads to higher conception rates, and in animals we'll say larger litter size. Another salient point from Larry and Jeffrey, 90 out of 92 couples on an infertility program in America were put on an organic diet. All conceived except the 2% that didn't conceive, who did not follow the organic diet protocol. The good news is you can avoid Roundup. As Larry has shown, the primary exposure is from food. By keeping to an all-organic diet, you can stay free from this devastating chemical. After 2 weeks on an organic diet, over 90% of the chemical has left your body. This still leaves 10% in you, and in subsequent posts I'll report on the findings which show that the gut microbes responsible for removal of toxins from the body are wiped out by Roundup preferentially. So there is a little confounding factor. Some of our most ill people, our autistic children, in fact, do not show much level of glyphosate in their wee because their body isn't capable and up to the task of removing it, eliminating it through that pathway or through the bowels. So what else have we got? The rates of Parkinson's disease in young males has skyrocketed in recent years, and Alzheimer's in women has increased over 600% in the last 20 years. Neurodegenerative diseases have recently overtaken cancer as the biggest killer disease, and the main suspect behind all this is Roundup, cancer included. I can't cover everything in one post, but I urge you now to minimise the damage to your DNA and major organs by going organic. And whatever you do, don't eat a conventional lentil salad or conventional oat muesli bar, or send your kids to school with that ubiquitous muesli bar. You have to be careful of the oats, wheat and legumes, and that's to remember that. Say to yourself, be wise like an owl. O for oats, W for wheat, L for legumes. Before people howl that they can't afford organics, can I ask you to get real? In this world, the Americans, the Poms, the Canadians and the Aussies are eating the most industrial food, and we expect to spend the smallest proportion of our income on food. In most populations of the world, people expect most of their income to go on food. To live or not to live in a groovy suburb or with exorbitant rent is a choice we have, and if I couldn't afford organic, I wouldn't be living there, etc., etc. You can eat quite cheaply from farmers markets if you seek out the right farmers. Oh, golly gosh, there's us. For 20 years, Donna Farmer studied Roundup as a Monsanto toxicologist. She lied on TV, saying that as a mother and a scientist, I can tell you it is safe. Privately, as released in documents later subpoenaed by attorneys, it was found that she had, during that exact time, gone through an article eliminating a link to miscarriages, wrote in internal memos, "We cannot be sure it doesn't cause cancer." Obviously, she knew there was dose-related deaths of lab animals in trials, and she was cognizant that tumour formation was likely to be linked to Roundup. These are the people that have all the media space. These are the people that trash the reputations of independent scientists who show inconvenient truth about Roundup. These scientists, such as our Dr. Carmen from South Australia, are the ones shopping in op shops. They've lost their jobs. Are you going to support this Monsanto Bayer mob with your food dollars who support those farmers, or are you going to support those farming sustainably? Are you going to promote those who are caring for health and environment, making sure they're still here doing what they do when fuel and supermarket shelves dry up? Bill Mollison decades ago implored us to withdraw our support from agribusiness corporations and declared agriculture to be the most destructive force on earth. Join me in the op shop and in the fields on a quest to weaken these 5 corporations controlling food and health. We can create communities that support organic farmers, who in turn nourish us with nutrient-dense real food. After 35 years of food forest development, I can say we don't support big ag and big pharma anymore, because to us, health is simply our most valuable asset. In this country, we're very lucky to have the space to grow our own food, and wonderful activist people everywhere have created community gardens you can join should you not have land and not be into container gardening, or coming to some agreement with someone who has a backyard too big for them to manage, that you could trade your gardening skills to grow food for yourself and a weekly box for them. Please subscribe to our email list to receive notice of the next video, where we will learn from a leading functional medicine doctor who is having amazing success detoxing his patients from Roundup with all sorts of very interesting treatments. Email me, B. Winfield, merribeefarmacy@gmail.com, to arrange me to send you further information on any of the topics covered. Thank you.